Hey everyone, we theoretically are live right now for another drinking in D&D. So I was planning on probably doing some board games, but I wanted to try and get a second monitor set up, figure out if everything's working with this setup, so Kristen will be able to do some streaming of other things. But I should quickly introduce myself and verify that out of those I'm following. Am I in fact live? Hey, I am live. Excellent. Theoretically. Sorry. This is still, yep, I can see movement. That's what I wanted to see. This is still fairly new for me doing Twitch. I just wanted to make sure everything was up and running. And since I didn't tweet this out, which I should do, Twitter, and I'm not going to doesn't like to keep me logged in. So today I'm talking about D&D character creation. In Dungeons and Dragons. Character sheet. I'm not going to do character creation actually this time. I had originally thought about doing character creation, but I want to really run over the character sheet. This is kind of the bread and butter for the players beyond their own creativity. And so I wanted to really focus in on the character sheet and talk about the different areas and kind of why they're important and what to think about when you're creating your character. But before that, let me jump in and tell you what I'm drinking. I'm drinking some fresh squeezed from Deschutes. So, the character sheet, I don't know how much, it's form fillable, so I'll be able to point out different areas. Yeah, that's visible, you can see my mouse, everything excellent. So, probably the biggest thing that can kind of trip players up, I think, is figuring out the character sheet. Obviously, there's a whole lot of other things, just the whole concept of role-playing. For some people, it might be fairly new, but the character sheet is pretty, what we like to call crunchy. That's where all the numbers get put. That's where all the weird things happen for like the numbers that you're worried about and looking to figure out what you add to your die roll or what your character can do, which will change depending on if you're a fighter or a wizard or a rogue or a cleric. You're going to have all sorts of different abilities, and the character sheet is the real area where you're going to be keeping track of all of those things. So probably the three biggest things to notice on the character sheet to start are going to be your class, so where I'm highlighted right now. So if I'm creating a character, I can start with the ranger. You can either print these sheets off or fill out them on computer. There are form fillable PDFs, which is what I have here, but either works just fine. So then, this is the first thing you have to think about. Well, one of the first things. There are probably two primary things that people think about when creating their character first. It's what class are they going to be and what race are they going to be. And we have spots for both of those things. And so that's going to be where you keep track of those things on your character sheet. For the class and level, if you multi-class, go or have a character that's two different classes, you can keep track of that there. With the race, that's never going to change, but that's where you're going to be noting it down. And your race is important because it's going to give you some special abilities. Who knows what those will be for your character, depending on your race completely. And then your class, again, is also going to give you a lot of special abilities. And the final area, up here in the top of the I hate scrolling on these sometimes, is the background. So, if I'm a sage background, that means I am well studied. So I get a few additional skills that help me because I'm well studied. So I might get proficiency in something like history. And we'll talk about what proficiency means and what those skills are later. But your background's really going to give you your skills. And with your background, your class is kind of like what you do now. Your background is what you've done before. It might be something you still do now, but it might be something that you did a long time ago. If you're an elf who's 500, maybe you were a sage for 150 years back when you were 200. So what were you doing for the last 50 years? That's not necessarily your background. You could have been off doing whatever you wanted, because the background you pick is the one that more influences your character and who they are. Your class is more about what your character is good at right now, what your character has been training for and is continuing to train for, and your race is simply your race. There are a few other things up here as well. I'll come back to alignment and talk about what that means. I will actually do a full video at some point in time on alignment, because it's one of the trickier things I think in Dungeons and Dragons that people often don't fully understand what it is. Player name. So that is my name, not the character name. But Weaselbob is an NPC I am creating right now on nerdologist.com. So that's why I have Weaselbob up here. XP, experience points. We can talk about those later and kind of how you can use them for leveling up or not use them, as the case may be, and with how I play. But it's one of those things. This would be where you track if you are keeping experience points for like your combat and stuff like that, and that determines when you level up. So, the next thing I'm going to hop to is along the side over here. We have these 6 areas that really are your character's key statistics, but these 6 things are kind of meant to encompass every single area of a person. Like it's very broad, very generalized, but if you have to roll something, you want to have some sort of stat that you can roll it against. And if nothing else, you have these 6 really broad categories. So you have strength. That is primarily strength. I mean, like how much you can lift, how much you can push, how well you are at being able to complete physically demanding challenges. Strength is going to be able to focus more on that. Then we have dexterity. Dexterity is, again, dexterity. It's acrobatics. It's your ability to kind of sneak around and be light on your feet. So if you're dancing, or if you are climbing up into a tree, trying to hop from branch to branch and not fall down, that might be a dexterity check. Or say you're walking along the edge of a wall to get, or along a roof to, and you're trying to keep your balance, that's going to be dexterity. Next we have Constitution. This one's a little bit trickier to explain, but Constitution is your ability to handle sickness, physical challenge like that. If you get into a drinking contest, you'll be rolling Constitution checks unless you're really good at dexterity, and then you'll be rolling sleight of hand checks to toss your drinks so that you're not actually drinking them. But Constitution's kind of that hardiness, that how well are you able to deal with, say, the elements or things like of that nature if you just find yourself to be caught in them. I really hate these notifications. I should see if I can turn them off somewhere. I'll do that later. So these top three are much more physical in nature. The bottom three are intelligence-based, or cerebral in nature. There we go. That'd be we're considering the first one on there is intelligence, so I shouldn't use intelligence-based. So cerebral, in your head. With intelligence, well, I should point out the top two we have here. We have intelligence and we have wisdom. And those often can be considered fairly similar. Like somebody who is wise often is considered to be quite intelligent as well. But they do a pretty good, or I've heard a pretty good way of describing the difference between the two. Intelligence is your book smarts. It is your ability to recall information that you've read before. Wisdom is your street smarts. It's your ability to know what to do in a given situation and your ability to be able to react within the moment. And so, like, those are how both of those are going to be used. One thing that people sometimes get confused on, and these are actually the skills that are under the two different abilities here. Intelligence has the investigation ability. Wisdom has perception. Perception is the one that a lot of people want to use to, like, find clues and stuff like that over investigation, because people like to put good stats into perception for good reason. Perception's is going to be what helps you notice a trap that might be hidden, or something that might be off, an ambush that might be being sprung on you, things like that. Or if somebody appears to be shifty, perception would be what you would originally notice them with. Perception is your ability to be aware of your surroundings. Investigation, which people tend not to want to use as much because a lot of people have intelligence as their what's known as the dump stat, which is the stat that you have the lowest number in. And they don't want to use investigation because if you have to use investigation, that means that you're rolling off of intelligence and you have a lesser chance of succeeding. But investigation is really using your brain to be able to fully stop and look at a situation, look at all the details of it. Instead of getting the big picture, you're focusing in on that narrow little bit of thing, which is similar to wisdom with your streetwise, is your ability to know what to do in a whole situation. Whereas intelligence is your ability to know about a very specific thing. And so that's a way you can look at the difference between those two. And the final one is charisma. And so that's your force of personality. So like if you want to lie to somebody, you'd be using deception, which is a charisma check. Or if you're trying to persuade somebody or intimidate somebody, all of those things, you are using your personality, your mannerisms to be able to affect people in those situations, hence your charisma. With charisma, there are times when people especially like if you're playing a barbarian. You might not have great charisma. You want to have great strength instead. So let's say a barbarian is fighting somebody and or doesn't necessarily even want to fight them, but it looks like it's going to be working towards that way. Your barbarian goes, okay, I'm going to go push over this tree to try and intimidate them. So they're using an act of strength to intimidate. So that means they roll their intimidation using their strength score. There's some debate on this, and I know there are a number of DMs who like to use strength for that because it's a physical act that they're doing, and that's what's supposed to be intimidating. However, I disagree with it because the physical act of pushing over the tree is not what's going to intimidate somebody. If you just walk up and like push over a tree and kind of be like, yeah, notice me, I just pushed over a tree. Or you push over a tree and you're like, don't fight me. That's not necessarily intimidating. If you walk up to the tree and acting like it is no big deal, just give it a little push and you send it over, that's intimidating. But it's how you're doing it, which is the charisma aspect of it. Now, there can be the strength piece to it too. Like pushing over a tree is probably not something a barbarian can do unless they have extremely high strength. So you could have them roll a strength check. If they hit a certain threshold on that, they push over the tree, which might then give them advantage on their charisma check for intimidation. Because now they've actually completed the physical act. It's not intimidating if the barbarian goes up to the tree, pushes on it, and it sways a little bit when they were trying to push it over. So you can work both checks in. That's my recommended way, but charisma is really the mannerisms, speech, all of that create a force of personality to get people to believe a lie that you're saying, to persuade them that you know best, sort of thing, especially if you do know best. Persuasion's what you'd use there. And so those are the 6. I was going to hold up my hand for 6, but I had the beer in the other hand. 6 big stats that you're keeping track of. Those are known as your ability scores. Then we have a few other things that are related to them. And let me just demonstrate how ability scores work. So let's say I'm a ranger. So let's go to dexterity. I want to be a really good shot. So there are a number of different ways you can get ability scores. There are 4 that I'll go over really fast here right now. The first is you roll 4 6-sided dice and you drop the lowest number, so you're keeping 3 of them, and you add up the total of all 3 of those dice. So the highest you could ever get is 18, the lowest you could ever get is 3, and most likely you're going to get somewhere in the middle. The next option is you just roll 3 dice, and that gives you your number. The downside of that is it's much higher percentile chance to get a low number, because when you're rolling 4 dice, the average of 4 dice average of 1 die roll is 3.5. So that means you're rolling a 4, and a 3, and a 3. And that averages out to 3.5, which means you're rolling 4 dice, you're getting 11. If you roll 3 dice, you're averaging 3.5 still. So you're either getting a 4-3-3 or a 4-4-3, which means you're either getting an 11 or a 10. So rolling 3 dice, you're going to statistically be lower. And so that's not a common one that I see, but it is certainly an option, and especially if you want to make it a little bit more of a challenging game where your characters are less almost superhuman in their abilities overall, that's a great way to do it. However, I would recommend a couple of different options before going to that one. The first of those is known as the standard array. So the standard array basically says, okay, you have 6 scores you're going for, so you get a 15, a 14, a 13, 11, 10, and 9, I want to say. Or maybe it's 11, 10, and 8. It's been a little bit since I've looked this up, but we can actually, let's do it really fast right now. Let's look this up. D&D standard array. 15, 14, 13, 12, 10, and 8. There we are. So, you are guaranteed to have a good number, but 10 is considered average, like average person in the fantasy world is a 10 at basically everything. 10 wisdom, 10 intelligence, 10 charisma, 10 strength, constitution, dexterity. They don't get any bonuses at anything, but they're perfectly average. So with the standard array, you have an 8 in there, you're going to have something that is below average. Then, the final way is known as point buy. So I believe, if I remember correctly, you start out with 27 points, and you basically spend points to gain increases in your numbers. If I remember correctly, with point buy, you start in at 8 and you simply buy up. So if you want to have 3 15s, that's 21 points. And my recollection of this is a little bit fuzzy, but basically you're spending your points to improve your attribute skills. So now you've spent 21, that means you have 6 for the other 3. So you could take all of them up to 10, which I think means my math is a little bit off. Maybe it's at 7 it starts or something like that. But you can end up with, I think if you evenly spend, you end up with basically 12s across the board. So as compared to point buy, or as compared to standard array, where you end up with only 1 15, you could have 2 15s if you wanted, maybe even 3 15s if you wanted, but you would then be suffering in the other stats, whereas the standard array is going to keep you a little bit more even across everything. Now, point buy and standard array are probably the more stable ways to do it than either of the dice rolling ways, which is why I personally prefer the dice rolling ways. I've only done the roll 4, drop the lowest one, and even when I do that, or have players do that, I will then adjust the numbers accordingly. But let's say we're a half elf, so we automatically get a +1 to dexterity. So we decide we're going to put our 15 from our point buy, or from our standard array in here, so we have 16 dexterity. So we're going to try an acrobatics check. We roll the dice, and we get a 12. 12 plus our dexterity is 38. No. So while the 16 is your base score, we have these 2 boxes here for a reason. The first tells you your base score, the second one tells you your modifier. So your modifier is fairly, it's a little bit complex to explain, but the math is actually very simple. You take whatever your ability score is, in our case 16, subtract 10 from it, so we're down to 6, and then we divide that by 2. So our ability score modifier is +3. Now let's say we had a 9 in Constitution. So let's do the same math. We take 10 minus 9, or 9 minus 10, so -1, divided by 2 is -1/2, and you always round down, so our Constitution modifier would be -1. And the same with, let's say our strength was 11. So we have 11 minus 10 for 1, divided by 2 is 1/2, round that down is 0. And so that's those plus or minus or 0 that I have up there. Those are the numbers that you adjust your die rolls with. Now you can see we have the different abilities over here. Let's see, can I... There, we're zoomed in a long way. I'll zoom out when we need to get to the other side of the board. Just double checking what it looks like on the stream over there. So we have, again, strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, and charisma, and it says saving throws underneath them. So what does that mean? To figure out that, let's talk about our proficiency bonus. Again, we're playing heroes, our villains, in D&D. So we're always going to be slightly better than the average person. And so, as a ranger, I'm always going to be slightly better at avoiding danger using dexterity. And because I'm going to be slightly better at that, and I'm proficient with that, I have a proficiency bonus of +2. So, somebody casts a fireball. I have the ability, since I'm dexterous, to be able to jump out of the way. Now, if I'm a dwarven fighter in heavy armor, and all I care about is bashing stuff, my dexterity is probably not that good. So I roll a die, get a 12, I have a -1, because I'm not proficient with it, and my dexterity is a -1, so I'm an 11. So I'm probably going to take all the damage from that fireball. But I'm the ranger, a half-elf ranger at that. I have +3 to my dexterity, so I'm good at avoiding stuff. I get a 12, and I'm making a dexterity saving throw, and something I'm proficient at. I'm good at dexterity. So I look and be like, okay, I add my +3. Okay, so my 12 is now a 15. And then I add my proficiency bonus of +2. I now have a 17. And to make the math easier, they give us this spot to fill it in. So I'm proficient with this. +5. Now, I'm trying to hang on to the edge of a hot air balloon using my strength. I need to make a saving throw, otherwise I fall to my death. Or I need to make a saving throw to hold the door closed, whatever it might be. Well, I'm not proficient with that, and I have a 0 in strength, so my saving throw is 0. But let's say I have it in constitution. So my constitution's -1. I've just drank some poison. I have a chance to make a saving throw and not be poisoned, or take less poison damage. Well, I roll a 15. Oh, I have a -1 in my constitution. But wait, I'm proficient. That means I get to add my +2 to that -1, which means I have a +1 in constitution, which means I get a 16 total. And that's how saving throws work, based off of those same skills and your proficiency. Then we have down here, or attributes I should say, because down here we have a whole bunch of different skills. Acrobatics, animal handling, arcana, perception, performance, intimidation, investigation, medicine, so many of these things. Well, all of these, and it's really hard to see on the screen. Hopefully it's a little bit better on the stream than it is on my screen. But each one of them is tied into a skill. So let's say I dumped intelligence. So I'm not proficient at history. I'm bad at history. I have a -2 there. But I know I know a lot about nature. I'm a ranger. It makes sense. I have good knowledge on nature. However, I'm kind of stupid still. Like, my intelligence is still bad, no matter how you look at it. So, I roll a check to see if a plant is poisonous. Which might be survival, but it's me racking my brain to remember, is this plant poisonous? Well, I roll an 8. Oh, well, my intelligence is a -2, so that's 6. However, I'm proficient. So I add +2 back in, I'm at 8 again. So instead of doing that math every time, I can just put down a 0 there, because I'm proficient at it. But let's say I'm also proficient at acrobatics. So like the saving throw, this now is a +5. So I'm in a log rolling contest where I'm trying to roll the log in water so that my opponent, who's standing on one side of the log, falls off. He or she is standing on that side of the log trying to roll it so that I fall off. And believe it or not, there are legitimate competitions for this in the real world. I've watched them. So both of us roll dexterity checks to see who's getting the advantage in our competition. I roll an 8, they roll a 10. Oh, they're going to beat me, but I have more dexterity. Not only do I have more dexterity, I'm proficient. So while they're getting a +2 to their 10, I'm getting a +5 to my 8. That means I'm ending up at 13, they're ending up at 12, and I've beat them because I'm proficient with dexterity. And I could go through how each of these skills is kind of used, but that's probably for another video coming up here, as we're already at 32 minutes. So let's continue just kind of going through this sheet. So what I haven't talked about on this side is inspiration. Inspiration is something that myself as the DM theoretically gives you. I'm really bad at remembering it. Hopefully your DM is better at remembering it than I am. Or if you are the DM, hopefully you're better at remembering it than I am. Inspiration is basically what you give your players for encouraging cool roleplay. So, or cool moments in the game. So maybe the ranger is like, alright, I'm going to try and shoot the rope that is holding the chandelier up, and I'm trying to drop the chandelier down into the room to cause some panic so that the prisoners were able to start to get the prisoners out the door before the bandits realize that they are under attack. Okay, that's a cool idea. That's something that I wouldn't have thought of or planned for as the DM. It's something that you wouldn't always expect players to come up with, so you give them inspiration. What that means is sometime during that session, when they have a really important roll to make, they can roll with advantage. What advantage means is you roll 2d20 and you take the higher. There was, I believe, Ted from Nerdarchy, being a huge D&D nerd, tried to figure out, like, okay, if I roll pairs of dice about 1,000 times, how much on average do I improve my roll by having advantage? And he found out that it's about a +5. So that means if I roll 2 dice, an 8 and a 13. Well, if I'd only rolled 1, I could have gotten the 13, but I might have gotten the 8, and I'm stuck with that. Inspiration allows you, before a very important roll, to grab 2 dice and roll them. And you use it once and it's gone. But it's a fun thing to encourage good role play, and then to encourage more awesome moments later in the game. So let's move into the center column, kind of towards the top here. We have 7 different areas, and this, like I said, this is getting to be about 35 minutes at this point. I'll probably continue for another 5-10 minutes, and I'll pick up with a second part to this stream later. So first we have Armor Class, or AC as it's commonly referred. Armor Class is basically your ability to avoid or deflect attacks without getting injured. So if your armor class is higher, say you're wearing plate mail and it's like a 18, and you have a shield that takes it up to 20, that means it's really hard for your enemy to hit you. And more so, I'll talk about this when I get to hit points here in a few seconds, it makes it easier for you to block attacks. And let's just go straight into hit points. So we have 3 different areas for hit points. We have hit dice, which is basically every character has a certain amount of hit dice and a certain type of hit dice. The amount you have, no matter what class of character you are, is always 1 per level. So if I'm a first level ranger, I have 1. Your hit die can vary though. A wizard has a d6, so a 6-sided die. A barbarian has a 12-sided die. That means a barbarian is hardier and able to recover stamina throughout the day better than a wizard is able to, because a wizard is more cerebral character. They have a high intelligence. So yeah, Weasel Bob is definitely not a wizard. What gets confusing to people at times, and is a little bit tricky to remember, is that hit points really more are stamina points. If you think about it, and you're in a fight, and say somebody shoots an arrow and it sticks in your shoulder, or it does, in D&D terms, 3 points of damage, and now you have an arrow sticking in your shoulder. How well would you be able to fight with an arrow sticking in your shoulder? You would probably be basically out of the fight at that point. So realistically, from D&D's perspective, you're not getting the arrow stuck in your shoulder, but you're still taking hit points damage. So does that mean like grazes you, get a nice little cut across the cheek, it will turn into a scar that you then be able to tell stories about? Sure, something like that. But hit points really are talking more about the physical effort to avoid, or say with that arrow that came across the side, your ability to roll with it, and like you catch it out of the corner of your eye that something's coming, you move your head just in the nick of time. It's that mental stamina and physical stamina to be able to fend off blows, because really 1 good blow with an arrow or a sword will probably take you down. So that's how you can think of hit points. Hit points then are, you have a certain number per level. So let's say with a ranger here, I don't remember for sure the hit die they get. I believe it's a D10. So it's a 10-sided die. When you level up, you can either, depending on your DM, take the average of the 10-sided die. So 10-sided die, average 5.5. Actually round it up in this case to a 6, and then you add in your constitution modifier. So a negative constitution modifier, not that great. You'd be at 5.5, so 6, minus 1 is 5. Or you could roll the die. And that's generally what I have my players do. Because you roll the die, you roll a d10, you get that 10. And yeah, your constitution is -1, so you add 9 hit points, but that's great. But then you roll, and instead you roll a 1. Well, you're always going to get some hit points, so lowest you can go is 1. 1 minus 1 is 0, lowest you can go is 1, so you go back up to 1. You've only added 1 hit point. Oh, man, that sucks. But it's another way to kind of develop your character. Maybe you have a barbarian who's extremely strong, has good constitution, that say is a +2. But the person rolling the die always gets like a 1 or 2 or 3, like it's never getting more than 5. Well, now you have a ton of strength. Like, in some ways you're the character who has put all this effort into being super strong, almost bodybuilding, but not that much effort into like maintaining a healthy body. And so, yeah, you have a ton of strength to be able to take a hit, but you don't have the fortitude or constitution to be able to take a hit instead of dish one out. And finally, we have these temporary hit points. Basically, they are what it sounds like. They're hit points that are temporary. Maybe a cleric casts a spell on you and you get plus 10 hit points for 10 minutes. Well, you have 10 extra hit points because of magical protection. So basically, magical abilities are helping you dodge these attacks, but it's for a limited amount of time, and it can only help so much. So let's then hop over to these last 2 boxes at the top here, and we'll finish with death saves. The top one there is initiative. Initiative is basically how fast you can react in a fight. And to figure out your initiative, very simple. It's your dexterity modifier. So our ranger here, +3. That means when you start a fight, you roll a d20, 20-sided die. So say I roll a 10. Well, I add my +3, I got a 13. If I roll a 20, I'm at a 23. Higher number you are, the sooner you're acting in the battle. Basically, it's just your reaction time to get into battle, and based all off of your dexterity. So the more dexterous you are, even if you have a bad roll, you might be able to still go faster because you're adding in more. And then we have speed. Speed, which kind of sounds like it should be for getting into battle faster, is actually more the distance you can go. So a round of combat is 6 seconds. So if you've watched something like Critical Role, where they have 8 players, a round of combat might take 10 minutes with everything that's being done, all the attacks that are being done, all the information that's being gathered. But really, those 10 minutes of time, 20 minutes of time, whatever it is, in the real world of D&D, that's 6 seconds worth of time passing that took 20 minutes to roleplay out. And in those 6 seconds, you can move a certain distance. Like, I guess a good example here is football, American football. One of the things that prospects who want to get into the National Football League do is run a 40-yard dash. Basically, seeing how fast they can go 40 yards. The fastest that I remember is 4.23 seconds. Extremely fast to cover 120 feet. And that's, yeah, from a dead start and then sprint through the finish line. Now, I mean, most people aren't going to do that, but someone like that aren't going to go that fast. But somebody like that probably walks faster than most people too. So with that, somebody who's very fast or like very agile, quick on their feet, like my half-elf, elf here is going to have, say, 30 feet of movement. Now that's just walking movement, not really pushing it at all. So if I wanted to run, I could get up to 60 feet. So 20 yards in 6 seconds. Not that great, but now let's say instead of picking ranger, I picked monk. And monk has an ability that gives you extra, I think, or there's one that gives you an extra like 10, 15 feet of movement. So now in my 6 seconds just walking, I can go 45 feet. Or I can run 6 seconds and I go 90 feet or 30 yards. Now that's still slower than the fast football players, but I'm carrying a bow. I have a backpack on my back. They're in shorts and cleats. Yeah. My monk could probably beat them if he was wearing shorts and cleats as well. And so basically speed is just how far you can go in a single round. It really primarily pertains to combat, though you can also kind of use it for sneaking around stuff or other checks where it kind of matters how far you've gone each round. And finally, there are going to be times when your character gets knocked down and is dying. So when you hit 0 hit points, your character is starting to die. Potentially. Think of it as your stamina has run out. That last hit actually did some damage to you. It might not be life-threatening, but it's enough to keep you out of combat for at least a little while until you shake the cobwebs out of your head. So you get hit, you're at 0 or lower hit points. There is no lower, just go to 0, unless, let's say, our first level ranger has 10 hit points. 8 hit points. Let's say Weasel Bob has 8 hit points. We're fighting against a goblin. Goblin does 16 hit points. 16 hit points to Weasel Bob means Weasel Bob is dead. Because 16 is twice the number of hit points that Weasel Bob had at his maximum. So I'm more than my hit point maximum negative. But Weasel Bob has 8, and he only takes 10 damage. So I'm at -2. But in that case, it really doesn't matter because it's not my maximum negative already. I'm not at -8, and it doesn't stack additionally on additional hits. I'll explain how additional hits work later, in a few seconds here actually. But so now Weasel Bob is unconscious, or on the ground, and out of the fight. My turn comes around in combat again. I roll a 20-sided die. 10 or higher, I get a success. That means I'm getting closer to being stable again. I roll so first roll I get a 12. Alright, excellent. Success. Then I get a 6. Oh no. Then I get an 18. Oh yes. Oh, I'm 1 success away. Then I roll a 1. Oh no. I rolled the worst possible roll you can get on 20-sided die. It's between 1 and 20. Got the 1. I get 2 failures because I rolled a 1. Now Weasel Bob is no more. Rest in peace, Weasel Bob. But instead, I got a 2. Okay, I'm good. And then I got a 15. Alright. I've got my success track filled out. I'm good to go. I'm back in the fight. No. You're just stable. You're not going to die anymore. That's what's important. But now let's say I rolled a natural 20. So I rolled the highest I possibly could. Alright, let's clear out all of these things. I get 1 hit point back and I'm back in the fight. I found that little bit of reserve energy, pushing through, and I'm going to fight on. But now, let's say I'm on the ground again, and I'm fighting against a smart foe. Smart foe knows that this person's not dead yet. So, smart foe takes his sword and attacks me with it. Well, I'm lying unconscious on the ground. It's going to hit. It's an automatic hit. And they don't roll damage because I'm already on the ground. They're not seeing if they can damage me. They're seeing if they can give me another failure. So they hit me with their roll, and now I've taken additional damage. So I think they roll with advantage if you're dead on, or if you're incapacitated on the ground trying to come back. And now Weasel Bob is dead again. So we've started, and I would say out of what I've showed you thus far on the character sheet, this is the most important part of your character sheet. Not just the death saves, but all the sections I've shown you, including the fact that I still have come back to the alignment, because that's less important than some people will claim it is. But most of the time when people claim it is, it's because they want to do, I'll come back to it. There's a lot to explain about it. But I just want to thank you for checking out this video. Please consider giving me a follow on Twitch at Malts and Meeples, or on YouTube at Malts and Meeples as well. Thank you for watching, and I hope this has been informative, kind of a part one for how the character sheet works in D&D, and I hope the examples have been fun as well. I feel like examples are a really good way to learn some of these things, because they're a little bit more abstract as compared to just playing the game itself. But I'll see you next time. So, I had a second one ready for this. Bottoms up.